On August 5, 2025, after 35 long years on death row, Byron Lewis Black was executed by lethal injection in Tennessee. In this video, we'll revisit the chain of events that led to that moment, his final hours, his last meal, and the last words he ever spoke. The story begins back in the spring of 1988. On Friday, March 25th, at 5:30 p.m., 32-year-old Byron Black walked out of the Metropolitan Workhouse. He had been granted another weekend furlough, temporary freedom before returning on Monday evening. When he checked back in, right on time, he acted as though nothing unusual had happened. But in reality, that weekend had changed everything. During those 3 days, Byron murdered 3 people. Their bodies had not yet been found when he returned. That Sunday, 29-year-old Angela Clay was finishing a late shift at Vanderbilt Hospital, clocking out around 10 p.m. Her sister, Lynette Bell, had borrowed Angela's car for the weekend and came to pick her up. But Lynette wasn't alone. Byron, Angela's boyfriend on and off again, had shown up as well. Together, the 3 drove to the home of Angela and Lynette's mother, Amelia Bell. There, Byron dropped off Angela and her daughters, 9-year-old Latoya and 6-year-old Lakesha, then left without much conversation. Angela stayed behind a little longer, talking with her mother and sister before heading home close to 11 p.m. Before she left, she borrowed an iron and promised to bring it back the following day. But that would never happen. Sometime during the night, after the apartment was dark and quiet, Byron came back. He stepped through the door of Angela's apartment, where she and her daughters were sleeping. Inside, Angela was curled on her side in the master bedroom, fast asleep. Without hesitation, Byron walked up, raised his revolver, and shot her once through the head. She never had the chance to wake up. As he turned to leave, a noise stopped him. It was Latoya. She had been sleeping next to her mother, and the sound of the gunshot or the movement in the room stirred her. She shifted in bed, just enough for Byron to notice. Without a second thought, he aimed at the 9-year-old girl and pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through her chest and neck, forcing her sideways between the dresser and the bed. Blood filled her pillow and lungs. According to the autopsy, she struggled for nearly 10 minutes before dying. But Byron didn't stop there. He walked down the hallway to the room of 6-year-old Lakesha. The noise had already woken her. When she saw Byron, she probably thought everything was fine. He was a familiar face. But instead of safety, he raised his weapon again and fired 2 shots. One bullet struck her chest, the other near her hip. Though gravely wounded, she tried to crawl from the bed, dragging herself across the floor and leaving bloody handprints on the frame and the carpet. Eventually, she collapsed face down beside the bed, where she bled to death. Byron left the apartment calmly, locking the door behind him. By Monday, he was back at the workhouse right on schedule, as though nothing had happened. But this was not the first time Byron had used violence. Angela Clay's life had already been complicated. She and her husband, Benny Clay, had divorced a year earlier, though they still had their 2 daughters connecting them. Benny had hoped to reconcile, but Angela had also been seeing Byron during and after the separation. At times, she saw both men in the same week. Benny didn't like it, but Byron was determined not to let Angela go. The tension came to a breaking point in December 1986. After a heated argument, Benny walked toward his car, but Byron wasn't finished. He pulled out a gun and opened fire. The first bullet hit Benny's car, the second his foot, the third tore into his shoulder, stopping under his collarbone. Benny tried to run, but Byron chased him, shooting as he fled. Benny collapsed in the street. Byron caught up to him and stood over him with the gun raised, but before he could finish, Angela intervened, pushing Byron back. That hesitation saved Benny's life. Byron was arrested and pleaded guilty, serving time at the workhouse. Because his sentence allowed weekend furloughs, he still had partial freedom. That decision would ultimately cost Angela and her children their lives. When Angela failed to return the iron on March 29th, her mother, Amelia, grew suspicious. Angela was always reliable, and repeated calls went unanswered. Worried, Amelia sent another daughter to check the apartment, but she too found no response. The car was parked outside, the windows were covered, and the house was silent. That evening, Amelia and Lynette went to Angela's home themselves. They knocked, but there was no answer. Sensing something was terribly wrong, they contacted the police. Officers arrived around 9:30 p.m. They found no sign of forced entry, but through a window, one officer shone his flashlight into the bedroom. The beam fell across the small, lifeless body of a child. Inside, they found Angela dead in her bed, LaToya wedged between the mattress and dresser, and Lakesha face down on the floor of her room. Each had been shot. Investigators collected evidence from the scene, bullet fragments in the walls and bedding, and fingerprints on the phones inside the home. 3 prints matched Byron Black. The bullets were the same type used when Benny Clay had been shot 2 years earlier. To strengthen their case, detectives asked Benny to undergo surgery to remove the bullets still lodged in his shoulder. When examined, ballistics experts confirmed it came from the same gun used in the triple murder. Byron's behavior raised further suspicion. When detectives told him Angela and the children were dead, he broke down crying, but his demeanor changed quickly when other officers entered. The tears stopped, and he appeared calm, almost blank. He told police he hadn't seen Angela since Sunday night after dropping her off at her mother's house, claiming he spent the rest of the evening at a friend's home and later at his mother's. But the timeline didn't add up. Charlotte Walden, the friend he mentioned, said Byron had arrived around 8:30 p.m., stayed for less than an hour, and left by 9:30. He never came back. That gap of time was enough to unravel his alibi. When questioned again with his lawyer present, Byron's story changed. He admitted going by Angela's place, claiming the door was open and that he discovered the bodies already dead inside. He said he panicked, locked the door, and left without telling anyone. The jury did not believe him. On March 8, 1989, the birthday of 6-year-old Lakesha, Byron Black was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. The next day, the jury sentenced him to death for killing Lakesha and to 2 consecutive life sentences for Angela and LaToya, along with additional time for weapons charges and burglary. He would never walk free again. Over the decades, Byron's attorneys continued filing appeals, arguing that he was intellectually disabled and unfit for execution. Experts testified that he had suffered brain damage from prenatal alcohol exposure and lead poisoning as a child, impairing memory, learning, and impulse control. As an adult, he struggled with basic math, reading, and independent living. By his late 60s, his health had deteriorated further. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and dementia, and in 2024, doctors implanted a defibrillator in his chest to manage heart failure. His lawyers argued that during lethal injection, The device might misinterpret the process as a cardiac emergency and shock him repeatedly. Courts rejected that argument, ruling the execution would proceed. On the night before his execution, Byron requested his final meal: pizza with mushrooms and sausage, donuts, and butter pecan ice cream. On the morning of August 5, 2025, he was led into Tennessee's execution chamber and strapped to the gurney. Asked if he had any last words, he replied simply, "No, sir." He gave no apology and no message to the victims' families, who were seated nearby. Witnesses reported he seemed restless and confused. As the lethal drugs entered his veins, he groaned, "I can't do this. This is hurting so bad." Moments later, he raised his hand one last time before falling still. At 10:43 a.m., Byron Lewis Black was pronounced dead at the age of 69. After 35 years of appeals and delays, the state carried out his sentence. For Angela, LaToya, and Lakesha, justice had been slow, but it had finally come. What do you think? Was this true justice or something else? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries told with facts, not sensationalism.